Ancient DNA keeps revealing something unsettling, something that sits just beneath the surface of how we describe the fall of civilizations. We tend to imagine cultures fading slowly, institutions weakening, cities declining over generations, people blending into whatever comes next. That is the comfortable version of history. The genetic record is less comfortable. Across multiple regions and across thousands of years, ancient DNA shows a recurring pattern. During periods of collapse, male lineages do not simply thin out. They shift, sometimes dramatically, sometimes within what appears to be only a few generations. Civilizations do not just reorganize culturally, their paternal bloodlines reorganize too. In Mesoamerica, this pattern becomes difficult to ignore. When researchers began sequencing ancient remains from central Mexico, from regions associated with major urban centers and later imperial formations, they were not searching for evidence of violent demographic rupture. The goal was straightforward: reconstruct population history, understand migration, trade, mixture over time. What emerged was sharper than expected. Y chromosome data, the genetic signature passed from father to son, shows discontinuities at several key transition points. Periods associated with political upheaval, urban destruction, or regional instability often coincide with noticeable changes in paternal ancestry. The male lines that dominated one era are sometimes largely absent in the next. What makes this striking is not that populations changed. Populations always change. It is the asymmetry. Maternal DNA, passed through mitochondrial inheritance, often shows far greater continuity across the same transitions. Women appear to remain, to be integrated, to carry genetic continuity forward. The male lines, by contrast, can reorganize far more sharply. Take the broader region tied to the rise and eventual destabilization of Teotihuacan. At its height, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the ancient world, a dense urban center whose influence extended across Mesoamerica. Archaeology shows evidence of burning, internal unrest, structural dismantling. The genetic data does not describe the violence directly, but it registers the aftermath. Paternal signatures shift. Later populations show different dominant Y chromosome lineages than those associated with earlier urban phases. This does not mean every man disappeared. It does not mean extermination. What it does mean is that the male genetic structure of the population reorganized substantially enough to leave a detectable mark thousands of years later. And Mesoamerica is not alone. When ancient DNA was sequenced from Bronze Age Britain, researchers observed something even more dramatic. Around the time populations associated with steppe ancestry moved into the region, the Y chromosome landscape changed profoundly. Estimates suggest that a very large proportion of earlier male lineages were replaced. Over a relatively short period in prehistory, the maternal ancestry showed more continuity. The paternal ancestry shifted sharply. Again, this does not automatically imply total annihilation, but it does indicate a demographic transformation in which incoming male lineages became dominant, while many prior paternal lines diminished or disappeared from the genetic record. If this pattern appeared once, it might be treated as an anomaly. It does not. Variations of it appear in multiple regions and eras, often associated with expansion, conquest, elite turnover, or systemic collapse. The question is not whether civilizations experience violence. That is obvious. The question is how that violence reshapes biological inheritance. Y chromosome lineages are uniquely sensitive to power structures. Because they pass strictly from father to son, they amplify the reproductive success of specific male lines. If a small group of males achieves disproportionate social dominance, whether through military power, elite status, or control of resources, their genetic signature can expand rapidly. Conversely, if dominant male lines lose status, lose wars, or lose access to reproduction, their genetic signature can contract just as dramatically. This creates a structural asymmetry in the genetic record. Women from conquered or absorbed populations are often integrated into the new social order. Men, particularly those tied to former elites or rival groups, may face higher mortality, displacement, or exclusion from reproduction. Over generations, this produces exactly what ancient DNA sometimes shows: continuity in maternal lines, discontinuity in paternal ones. It is tempting to frame this as erasure. That word carries weight. But what the data more precisely shows is replacement through dominance, a reorganization of reproductive power. Consider how polygyny, even at modest levels, amplifies this effect. If high-status males reproduce more frequently than lower-status males, their Y chromosomes expand faster. In unstable periods, when social hierarchies reset, the new dominant group can reshape the paternal landscape within a surprisingly short time frame. Violence accelerates this. Warfare historically concentrates mortality among men. When combined with social systems that privilege victorious groups, the genetic consequences compound. The defeated do not simply lose territory, they may lose lineage continuity. When we describe civilizational collapse, we usually focus on architecture, on trade networks, on written records, on cultural decline. We rarely consider that collapse might involve the restructuring of who gets to become a father. Ancient DNA forces that question back into view. In Mesoamerica, the rise of later imperial formations, including the Aztec expansion, occurred in a landscape already shaped by previous upheavals. As political power consolidated, paternal lineages associated with dominant groups expanded geographically. Genetic studies of post-expansion populations show patterns consistent with the spread of certain Y chromosome signatures across broader regions. This mirrors what we see elsewhere in the world during periods of state formation and conquest. The important point is not that one civilization uniquely erased another. It is that repeated episodes of political reorganization often coincide with measurable shifts in paternal ancestry. This reframes collapse. Instead of imagining civilizations fading gently into successors, the genetic record suggests something more abrupt at the level of male inheritance. Cultural continuity may survive, language may persist, maternal ancestry may endure, but the paternal structure can change in ways that are far more dramatic than traditional narratives emphasize, and this is not limited to prehistory. Even in historically documented empires, expansions often leave disproportionate Y chromosome footprints. When a conquering elite embeds itself within a region, its male lines can persist at elevated frequencies long after the political structure dissolves. The genetic record becomes an archive of who held reproductive power, not just who held territory. What ancient DNA reveals, then, is not a secret history hidden from archaeology. It is a dimension of history that archaeology alone cannot fully capture. Bones and ruins tell us cities burned. DNA tells us which male lines survived the aftermath. This pattern does not require conspiracy. It does not require global resets or mythic lost civilizations. It requires only a recognition that power and reproduction are tightly linked. When power shifts violently, reproduction shifts with it. Across regions separated by oceans and millennia, the same structural logic appears. Periods of instability correlate with paternal turnover, not always total, not always immediate, but often detectable. The implications are sobering. Human history is not only a story of cultural exchange and technological progress. It is also a story of competitive hierarchies in which male reproductive lines rise and fall with political fortunes. Civilizations do not merely collapse culturally, they reorganize biologically, and the deeper we sequence ancient genomes, the clearer that pattern becomes. We are only beginning to understand how often this occurred, how many times paternal landscapes were reshaped during transitions that written history barely recorded. Each new dataset refines the picture, but the broad outline is emerging. Civilizational change is not just architectural, it is demographic. It is not always gradual. And in more than one case, it has been violent enough to redraw the genetic map of fatherhood itself. Ancient DNA does not show civilizations fading quietly into memory. It shows power reorganizing, sometimes abruptly, sometimes forcefully, leaving its signature in the Y chromosome record for thousands of years. That is not a mythic erasure. It is a structural pattern, and it may be one of the most underemphasized aspects of how human societies have risen and fallen across time.